Burying my father was already the hardest day of my life, but my grieving was cut short in the worst way possible. Right after the funeral, my wife coldly pulled me aside and dropped a financial bombshell that left me sobbing. She smugly admitted that she had secretly stolen my entire $5 million estate right under my nose. Not only was the money completely gone, but she told me I was being evicted from my own home. I felt like a completely broken man, crying uncontrollably as my world fell apart. But my tears quickly dried when I pulled a single, shocking document from my pocket that changed absolutely everything. The morning air felt unusually cold as I stood in our large bedroom. I slowly adjusted my black tie in the tall mirror standing near the closet door. My father had passed away suddenly over the weekend. Organizing the entire burial service over the last few days took a huge toll on my energy. I grabbed my car keys from the wooden dresser and walked out the front door. The drive to the local cemetery took almost an hour due to heavy traffic. Dozens of dark cars already filled the narrow parking lot when I finally arrived at the cemetery gates. I stood near the main entrance to properly welcome the long line of visitors. Many distant relatives and old family friends offered their condolences as they walked past the iron gates. I shook their hands and directed them down the paved path toward the open family grave. The large gathering of people slowly formed a circle around the burial site. Everyone waited quietly for the final service to officially begin. My relatives huddled close together near the front row of folding chairs. Sarah kept her distance from everyone as the priest started reading from his black book. She stood near a large oak tree, several yards away from the main gathering. Her complete lack of interest in the memorial service bothered several of my cousins. They shot angry glances at her direction while the priest continued speaking to the crowd. Sarah ignored their stares completely and kept her focus on something else entirely. Her eyes remained locked on the bright screen of her mobile device. She typed rapidly on the keyboard and constantly checked for new notifications throughout the priest's speech. A tall man in a gray suit arrived a few minutes late and stood right beside her. Sarah leaned in close and whispered quietly to the strange lawyer hiding in the back. They exchanged a few brief nods before the man handed her a thick manila envelope. The suspicious interaction distracted me from the final moments of the burial ceremony. The cemetery workers carefully operated the loud machinery to lower the heavy wooden casket. I tossed a small handful of loose dirt over the edge and watched it fall deep into the ground. My uncle patted my shoulder firmly before leading the rest of the family toward the reception hall. I stayed behind for a few extra minutes to properly say goodbye to my dad. Eventually, I turned around and walked away from the empty gravesite. The cold wind picked up slightly as I headed toward the parking lot. I nearly reached my vehicle when a sharp grip suddenly clamped onto my left arm. Sarah dug her expensive acrylic nails directly into my sleeve and stopped me in my tracks. She aggressively pulled me away from the open pathway and dragged me behind a large stone mausoleum. The massive granite structure blocked us completely from the view of the remaining cemetery staff. Her sudden burst of physical aggression caught me off guard. She shoved me against the cold wall and blocked my only path back to the car. An arrogant smirk formed across her face as she unzipped her black leather handbag. She dug her hand deep inside the expensive designer purse and rummaged around for a few seconds. A moment later, she pulled out a thick stack of printed papers secured by a large metal clip. She shoved the heavy bundle directly into my chest and forced me to take it. The top page clearly displayed the official logo of my personal financial institution. I scanned the numbers and immediately recognized them as official bank statements. The first column of numbers showed a massive withdrawal from my primary savings fund. Sarah proudly stated she had officially transferred the entire $5 million estate out of my name. She bragged about moving every single penny into her own private offshore account just an hour ago. The total balance at the bottom of the printed page now read 0. She explained her legal team exploited a loophole in my father's recent will to authorize the massive transaction. I stared at the missing funds in absolute horror. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped to the second piece of paper in the stack. Sarah stepped forward and forcefully slapped a formal eviction notice right onto my dark suit jacket. The bright red stamp at the top of the page indicated an immediate order to vacate the premises. She claimed absolute ownership over our primary residence as part of the massive financial takeover. The court seal at the bottom of the document confirmed the legal validity of the sudden eviction. She smiled widely at my total shock. She tapped her expensive watch and pointed a finger directly at my face. She instructed me to quickly pack my bags and leave our shared mansion before the clock struck midnight. She promised to call the local authorities if I remained on the property past the strict deadline. Her harsh words echoed loudly against the stone walls of the dark mausoleum. She threatened to throw all my clothes onto the front lawn if I delayed my departure. I needed to act fast to counter her cruel demands. My breathing slowed down as I remembered my careful preparations from earlier that very morning. I had deliberately folded an official paper in half before leaving the house. I had placed that crucial document securely inside the inner pocket of my dark suit coat. The thick parchment rested safely against my chest the entire time I stood by the open grave. I could feel the sharp edge of the folded paper through the thin fabric of my shirt. That hidden document held the key to stopping her malicious plan. I originally brought the special paperwork to the funeral to stage a massive confrontation. I intended to corner Sarah about the completely fake marriage she had orchestrated from the very beginning. Her sudden financial attack just happened to force my hand slightly earlier than I anticipated. She clearly expected her aggressive legal ambush to catch me totally unprepared. I let her finish her little speech about taking my father's money and claiming my house. She remained totally oblivious to the trap I had carefully laid out for her. The sequence of events started when I cleaned out my father's office earlier that week. I had quickly read through an old marriage certificate buried inside his desk drawer. The shocking names printed on that aged document caused me to drop the paper in absolute horror. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed my family attorney's emergency contact number. We spent several hours discussing the legal ramifications of the terrifying discovery. The lawyer urged me to gather more evidence before making any sudden moves against Sarah. Following the attorney's strict advice, I began secretly investigating my wife's past. I hired a local private detective on Tuesday to dig into her background. The experienced investigator searched through several public databases and county archives. Within 2 days, he uncovered a hidden legal document that called the very foundation of our entire marriage into question. The private detective hand-delivered the shocking file to my office on Thursday afternoon. The contents of that specific file confirmed my absolute worst fears about Sarah. The detective placed a thick brown envelope on my desk and asked me to open it immediately. This crucial investigation led me to uncover the hidden legal document detailing her previous relationships inside a secret folder. The organized pages listed multiple addresses and several different aliases she used over the last decade. A certified court seal stamped on the final page validated the horrific information. I finally understood the real reason she pursued our relationship so aggressively 2 years ago. Her entire identity was a carefully constructed lie. I snapped back to the present moment behind the stone mausoleum. I wiped heavy tears from my face while Sarah laughed viciously at my complete silence. She assumed my quiet demeanor meant I had finally accepted total defeat. She mocked my grief and taunted me about sleeping on the streets tonight. Her cruel laughter bounced off the surrounding granite walls and filled the quiet cemetery. I let her enjoy her false sense of victory for a few more seconds. I released my tight grip on the printed bank statements she had shoved into my chest. I then dropped the formal eviction notice onto the wet grass near my dress shoes. I lifted my head and stared directly into my wife's narrow eyes. The smug grin on her face faltered slightly as she noticed the sudden shift in my attitude. I stood up perfectly straight and squared my shoulders toward her. The time for crying over my father's death and her cruel betrayal had officially passed. Her confident posture returned quickly as she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. She pointed aggressively toward the main exit and told me to leave the funeral grounds right away. She warned me her new lawyer would call the police if I caused a scene. I ignored her direct orders and took a confident step forward. Several late funeral guests began walking down the path near our hiding spot. The approaching crowd provided the perfect audience for my upcoming performance. I slowly unbuttoned the front of my dark suit coat. I reached my right hand deep into my inner jacket pocket. My fingers quickly grasped the folded sheet of paper the private detective had provided. I pulled the stiff document out into the open air and flattened the deep creases. Sarah narrowed her eyes at the mysterious piece of paper in my hands. She demanded to know what I was holding so carefully. I stepped completely out from behind the mausoleum and onto the main paved pathway. I held the document up high so the approaching funeral guests could clearly read the bold text. A dozen distant relatives stopped in their tracks and stared at the official state seal. Sarah rushed forward and desperately tried to snatch the paper out of my tight grip. I easily dodged her clumsy attempt and kept the document firmly out of her reach. The gathered crowd watched our sudden physical altercation in total shock. The commotion attracted even more people from the nearby reception hall. At my father's funeral, I loudly revealed the shocking legal papers to the massive crowd gathered around me. I pointed directly at the certified signatures, printed clearly at the bottom of the page. The loud whispers among my family members grew into angry shouts within seconds. Sarah's face turned completely pale as she finally recognized the specific government form in my hands. Her hired lawyer peeked out from behind the crowd to see the mounting chaos. I read the contents of the certified document loudly for everyone to hear. The official papers proved Sarah was still secretly married to my older brother named David. He had fled the country 5 years ago under highly suspicious circumstances. I revealed the legal papers proving she was still tied to him, making our marriage entirely void. This shocking revelation instantly destroyed her legal claim to my father's massive estate. A collective gasp echoed through the cemetery as the ugly truth was finally exposed. Sarah frantically looked around for an escape route as the crowd closed in around her. I shouted loudly that her prior marriage completely voided our union from the very beginning. I explained how her fraudulent status officially destroyed her recent estate claim entirely. The lawyer standing in the back immediately turned around and sprinted toward his parked car. Sarah screamed for him to come back and help her fight the sudden allegations. Her carefully planned financial heist failed completely right before her eyes. She desperately tried to shove the remaining financial documents back into her designer purse. I quickly stepped forward and snatched the bank statements right back from her hands. I ripped the thick stack of papers and tore them into tiny pieces. I threw the shredded evidence directly into the air and let it fall around her feet. My family members quickly surrounded her and blocked her path to the parking lot. The cemetery manager arrived moments later and immediately dialed the local authorities on his radio. A pair of large cemetery security officers sprinted down the paved pathway toward the commotion. The 2 guards grabbed Sarah firmly by the shoulders and restrained her flailing arms. They forcefully escorted her off the private property, while my relatives cheered loudly. I watched her struggle against the officers all the way to the main entrance gates. My massive estate remained completely secure, and my fake wife would soon face serious criminal charges. I finally found the peace I needed to properly mourn my beloved father.